So now we're very delighted to be able to present Paul Manners, who is here, who's leading the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement in the UK. Oh, you're there. I couldn't see you. So please come up. It's called the NCCPE, and this center was founded in 2008 to inspire and support universities to engage with the public and to increase the public's trust in science. We're very happy to have you here. Give me a big hand.
Thank you. So hello, and it is lovely finally to understand what somebody is saying. It's been interesting but rather challenging to follow the conversation, but I've had some help and people have interpreted for me some of the conversation. What I want to do today is tell you a story. It's the story of a journey that we've traveled in the United Kingdom. It's a story with some heroes and potentially some villains. And it's a story that has involved some struggle and some adversity, as all good stories do. But I hope it has some important lessons for you here in Sweden. And it's a story that starts really where you are today. It starts in the UK when we did a survey, very similar to the survey that you've been listening to the results of today. So, where does the story start? It starts once upon a time. And I'm going to take us back to the year 2006. Yes, just to help you remember, it was a long time ago. George Bush was president of the United States. It was the year in which Saddam Hussein was captured and was executed. But it was also the year in which a survey was conducted in the UK, a survey called Factors Affecting Science Communication by Researchers. Very similar set of questions to yours, and the findings I think you won't find surprising. So, barriers. 64% said time. They don't have time. And interestingly, that last bullet point, science communication was viewed as altruistic and not a central part of academic life. So why did we do this survey? I think it's really important to understand the context for it. It was funded by Wellcome. It was supported by research funders in the UK. It was managed by the Royal Society. And it was undertaken because there was a feeling that there was a real crisis in the relationship between science and society, not to put too hyperbolic a framing of it. There was a genuine sense of a breakdown in trust. And this is just one example of the kind of debates that were happening at that time. In parallel with that, I think there was a sense that the university sector as a whole was drifting and losing support on a number of fronts. It wasn't just about trust. It wasn't just about science. It was broadly about the role of universities in society, the extent to which universities are viewed as relevant and connected to society, the extent to which they are accountable for public money. There was an increasing sense that universities, just as the health service and other forms of public service, have to speak up. Why? Why should you invest billions of pounds in our work? We have to be able to describe our value. And I think there was also a real sense that universities were perhaps perpetuating inequality, and the issues around social justice are really, really significantly sensitive in terms of who gets into universities and were universities doing enough. So a genuine sense that suddenly the wind had grown cold around universities and we had to do something about it. And this is where we enter the story, along with some very wonderful friends and colleagues. We were part of an initiative in 2008 that involved 6 beacons for public engagement, one of which was the University of Manchester with the University of Salford and Manchester Metropolitan University and a range of partners, and 5 other beacons. And sitting in the middle of that was the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement that's based in Bristol. And we were set a truly heroic, epic challenge. Create a culture within the UK higher education system where public engagement is formalised and embedded as a valued and recognised activity for staff at all levels and for students by establishing a coordinated approach to recognising, rewarding and building capacity for public engagement. Yeah. I'm still standing, but I do look a lot older than I did 10 years ago. Just a word about terminology, actually, because you use science communication a lot. I'm not really using science communication. I'm talking about public engagement. That is a phrase that has real traction and currency in the United Kingdom, and there are a couple of reasons for that. I think the first is to say that science, as a framing notion, excludes a lot of people who work in universities, who are working in the arts and humanities. It doesn't have an all-encompassing sense. So the word research is preferable in the UK because we're talking about all forms of knowledge production within the university. That was the frame that was set for us. The second thing to say is that the word communication has got a certain amount of baggage attached to it in the United Kingdom. There's a sense that the word communication implies that what we need to do is tell people things. Yeah. There's a deficit in their understanding that if only we communicate with them and tell them what we do and how marvelous it is, everything is resolved. And I think we all know that that, frankly, is not going to work. And I think it doesn't draw attention to the fact that there's a real responsibility on us to listen and to connect and to show interest. So I think the term engagement is a much more productive framing of what we're trying to do. So hence we talk about public engagement. So if I was to step back and say, there's one word that tells you what this story is about, I think it would be this: change. And I think that sort of, from what I can gather, has become part of the conversation today. I think that's what your report that you're looking at, it's telling you, you need to change, okay? Changing universities? Yes. There are many ways you can look at that challenge, but I don't think it's unrealistic to suggest that universities are quite difficult, very complicated organizations to change. They take a lot of time. There's very deeply sort of built-in cultures and practices that have worked for a long time that people feel very, very attached to. Academics love their freedom. They hate managers. So how do you get some kind of sense of we need to move in a different direction? And that's, frankly, what we've been thinking about and trying to understand and trying to do, actually trying to do things that work. So I want to fast forward the story, and we're back in the present, and this is the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement. This is our website. We are doing well. We're a vibrant organisation. We've grown. We've now got 8 staff. We don't want to become huge. We want to be a catalyst for change. But we have grown because the demand is significant. Every story, every hero, it really helps if you have superpowers, particularly when you've been given a really tough challenge. Our superpowers, I think it's fair to say, are represented along the bottom of the screen. That group of funders came together in 2008 and said, this matters, we want your help to fix it. And they're still there, they are still funding us. That same core group is saying, this is a journey that isn't finished, we have to stick together and we need to keep pressing on. And I think that is incredibly significant. We have not worked in isolation, we've worked in partnership with our funders. Let me give you an example of how one of our funders is currently framing public engagement. This is UK Research and Innovation. They used to be called Research Councils UK. Their name has changed recently, but public engagement remains a strategic priority. It sits on their homepage, on their tabs. They've just launched a new vision for public engagement. But it isn't just about seeing, do they have the words public engagement on their homepage? Is it written into their strategy? There's a lot else that has been changing in the UK research system that's part of our story. Significantly, I think perhaps the most significant intervention has been how research excellence is assessed in the UK. You're probably aware of the fact that research excellence is no longer just assessed on the basis of research outputs and their excellence in the views of peer reviewers, but also we've introduced the assessment of the impact of research. So 25% of the overall profile score for a department is based on their impact, which is assessed through case studies. Not of all of the research that department does, but those areas of applied research or of their work which is engaged outside the university, they submit case studies. That has, I think it's easy to think of academics and as universities as very high-minded and very sort of principled people. But frankly, if you wave a large number of banknotes and you say there's some money here, people's behavior quite rapidly changes. And I'm not a cynic, but I think this is just a reality. The Concordat for engaging the public with research, all of the research funders, the key learned societies, committed to a set of principles, and universities are quality assured for their research and their research environment, and public engagement is one of the questions they get asked about. What on earth is that? If you ask that of somebody in the UK, they would probably know. They'd probably raise an eyebrow. It's called the Researcher Development Framework. What it is an attempt to say, this is what an excellent researcher does. And isn't it interesting that as part of that, one of the 4 domains is engagement, influence, and impact. This was created out of a sort of extensive consultation with people to try and capture what it means to do excellent research. So again, hardwired into our kind of narrative around engagement, around research rather, is this notion of engagement. And that's created a climate within which we, as a centre, have been able to do good work. Without that climate, I think we would have really struggled. So I'm giving you a relatively sort of positive picture of what's possible, and in a bit, I'll tell you a bit more about how we've done it. But I told you this was a story, and every story has ups and downs. And I think it's fair to say, 10 years ago, there was a kind of burning platform for this work, which was around trust. Recently, I think we're experiencing more turbulence that is really affecting and forcing us to think hard about what we're trying to achieve. And I should warn you, if you're of a sensitive disposition, that the next slide may disturb you. This is, well, you know who's on the left. On the right is Nigel Farage, who is leader of the UK Independence Party. I think it's fair to say that the kind of turbulence at the moment that we're all experiencing is putting new kind of impetus and new challenges around us in terms of how we think about engagement. I think it's true too that there are other voices in the public sphere that are also disrupting and creating new spaces for engagement. But you do not stand still, is the point I'm trying to make. In those 10 years, that context for the work has kept challenging us to keep thinking and keep, I guess, adapting how we work. So back to today and to your report. I think from what I can gather, from what I've managed to read in English, a summary, it's great to see so many green shoots, so much excellent, interesting practice. There is lots going on in Sweden, lots of excellent engagement to celebrate, but there is the same blunt problem that we found in the UK. There is no time. So what do you do with that? What's that telling you? And I think it's probably telling you this. This isn't a priority. And people are so busy. If it isn't a priority, they just won't find the time to do it. And that is a really significant problem. And sorting this out isn't going to be done by just telling people, oh, and you've got to do that as well. That isn't going to work. People are already overworked. They've already got too many pressures on them. So you need to find, I'd suggest, another way of accommodating that and deciding what you want to do about it. And I think at the heart of that question is for you, as university leaders, is do you think it matters? Is this really important for your university? And if it is, then you will need to change. And so that's where we started, really. We started with encouraging people to work out what they wanted to do with that challenge. And one of the things we developed was a manifesto for public engagement to create a sense of momentum and a sense of mobilizing people to really begin that journey of change. And this is an example of one of the many projects that we've been lucky to be involved in, a project involving communities and researchers looking at issues around age in the city of Manchester. So far, 90 universities have signed up to these principles and put in place sort of infrastructure to support that. We've given them as much practical help as we can. What we haven't done is send them a 100-page manual of how to do culture change. What we've tried to do is create tools to let them work it out for themselves. And this is an absolutely key piece of work that we've done, which is to create what we call a self-assessment matrix. It's a tool that allows people to look at themselves and to look at their support for engagement. Running down the left-hand side are a set of the critical things you need to think about. For instance, your leadership. And then running across, you can judge where you are. And it is one piece of paper, and it gives people, I think, a really practical way of reflecting on culture change, because without something practical like this, it becomes just too big and too abstract a problem. So let me save you from the challenge of trying to read that tiny text. What's at the heart of the EDGE tool and at our ideas of change? They're absolutely blindingly obvious. So there is no incredible revelation here. This is actually pretty much common sense. If you want change, you have to believe in it and you have to mobilize behind it. So you have to think about your purpose. You have to think about your mission, your strategy, your leadership. And from that, a lot of other things will follow. So taking that first area, embedding that commitment, that is what that fact about people saying they don't have the time is asking you to think about. They don't have the time. Do I want them to have the time? If I want them to have the time, what am I going to do about it? How am I going to reprioritize so that this area of work becomes something we actually support? What about the second area, the second kind of big finding from the report about a lack of skills, recognition, or support? 1 in 4 of the researchers were saying that they didn't feel that they were adequately supported. Only 4 in 10 felt they were equipped. 1/4 of doctoral students feel poorly or not at all equipped. What is this telling you? I was trying to think of a way of expressing this, and I kind of found that. I think for me, what that image is saying is that staff in our universities and our students are feeling hopelessly ill-equipped to operate in a world that is so much more sophisticated in terms of its communication and the way in which ideas move and the way in which change happens. We have to deal with that. And so for us, again, this is not rocket science, this is simple stuff. You have to think about the support that you offer to get people to a position where they can do this work and do this work well. And as part of that, learning, development, skills development is important, and I'll talk about that, but also recognition, actually. Is this something that there are career pathways through your university if you specialize in this area of work? Can you get promoted? Do you have professors who've reached that route because of the quality of their engagement activity? And there are now, and people have worked really hard to create those pathways. In terms of learning and capacity building, along the top, there are just some of the things we run as the National Centre. We run academies for engagement professionals in universities to sort of build their confidence and leadership. But lots of universities have taken on that responsibility. So there's UCL with a public engagement unit, there's the University of Oxford, there's the University of Bristol, just a sample of some of the universities and the work they're doing to put that infrastructure in place. Okay, so it's all sounding a little managerial maybe and a bit bureaucratic. You need to fix all of these things, you need to do all of this behind the scenes. I think it is always worth remembering, so why? Why does this work matter? And what does excellent work look like? And I think we are talking about bringing knowledge to life. And we are talking about really profoundly influencing and being influenced by the world outside the university. Your minister, I gather earlier, said we needed to be able to reach out into communities that we don't conventionally reach into, etc. How do we do that? Well, I think one of the things we need to do is to recognize that within the university sector, we have limited expertise often, and it's through partnership with experts outside the university that we can do great work. And here's just one example of how a Scandinavian museum is taking that challenge. They're trying to find a way to make their wonderful collection of great art by Rembrandt engaging, interesting, and captivating outside that museum.
Shoppers in the Dutch city of Breda get more than they bargained for after actors storm the shopping centre dressed in 17th century outfits. Abseiling from ropes and jumping from balconies, the group was staging a reconstruction of Rembrandt's painting The Night Watch to promote the reopening of the Rijksmuseum.
So I think, that speaks for itself in a way, but I think it shows how just as great art doesn't have to live within art galleries, so the work we do should live and breathe outside the university. And I think we've got so much to learn from others about how to do that work well. And this sort of last area of our framework for change is I think focuses on the people side of engagement. It's something that in universities we often overlook, but how important it is to take staff, students with you, to talk to your publics, to talk to your stakeholders, to listen and to partner, because there are others on this journey too who can help us and take us with them. Okay, so I'm beginning to wind up, but I don't want to be too optimistic, too positive, because it's hard. And yes, goodness me, it is hard. It's really hard. And we're really struggling, as you can tell, and you're probably feeling very smug and very grateful that you don't live in the UK. But there are things happening around us as universities that we have to make sense of. This is Michael Gove, one of our Oxbridge-educated senior government officials, who made a kind of slightly off-the-cuff remark about people in this country have had enough of experts. And it sent a really chill wind, I think, through academia. And we're really struggling to think about how we respond to that. I'm just going to show you one short clip in a second from an academic who's having these kinds of conversations. This is an academic who's based at King's College London, who runs a centre called the UK in a Changing Europe. And he's been doing a lot of work outside the university sector to try and have conversations with people about Brexit. And this is, I think, a very revealing clip. It's from a TED talk.
I want to start off, if you don't mind, in the pub. And more specifically, this is a pub in the centre of Newcastle. It's June 2016. We're about a week before the EU referendum. And I'm up there doing something I did quite a lot before the referendum, which is a Q&A session about what that vote was going to mean for the country. And about halfway through what I was saying, I said something like, every serious economic commentator is predicting that if we leave the European Union, our GDP is going to end up being smaller than it would have been if we'd stayed in. Okay? And at that point, a woman, about 3/4 of the way back, and to my eternal regret, I never got her name, but I'm going to call her Nora for the sake of alliteration, she stands up and she screams, "That's your frigging GDP, not mine." And she stopped me dead in my tracks. And partly she did so because she'd put her finger on a problem with the way academics like me and many politicians like to talk about our country. Because what we often do is we use broad generalizations and we use fancy acronyms to describe the state of the economy. But the problem for Nora and for her mates, and they were very, very insistent on explaining this to me at the bar afterwards, was what these acronyms didn't do was reflect the lives they led, because their lives were getting harder. And yet at the same time, the government was saying things like recovery, shared prosperity, we're all in this together. And so it shouldn't surprise us to learn that they weren't just angry about the economy, they were fed up with politics too. And because they thought that politicians just simply didn't get it. And worse than that, not only did politicians not get it, but there was nothing they could do about it because they thought their votes didn't count. One of them said to me, "You could shove a red rosette on a donkey here and it would win."
Okay, so a red rosette is for Labour, and you know what a donkey is. So I'm just going to take you right to the end and just offer you some final thoughts. I did want to talk to you about your wonderful photography exhibition, photography museum in the city, which I had the pleasure of visiting yesterday, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to wrap up really, and this is an image of the Ivory Tower. Now, I've used this for a few years, and it used to be for comic effect, frankly. You know, indifferent public, bumbling academics, not a bloody clue what to do. Actually, I looked at it recently and I thought this is now actually quite a sinister image, a real sense of potential threat, actually, in the relationship between universities and their communities. And I think we need to worry about that. And so we still need to be thinking about public engagement, but as I said, the kind of context for it keeps shifting. And it's becoming more urgent, I would argue. And I think that means that the results of your survey are not of passing interest. I think they point to a crisis at the heart of how we lead universities into a very uncertain future. So we need, I think, to hold firm to why we think engagement matters and what we want to do about it. And I think we need to think again about what is excellence. We love that word. We love to talk about excellence. And of course, excellence in the rigor, the robustness, and the professionalism of our research has to remain an absolute cornerstone of our work. But there are dimensions to excellence that we also need to bring into the conversation that we have with ourselves and with our partners. And I think yes, it is about excellence, but I think at the heart, this is about the values that drive us. And I think for us, when we think about change, you can come up with lots of instrumental reasons, you can come up with all kinds of tricks, but fundamentally, what do we really care about in terms of the values that drive us and the work that we do? So that's a sort of quite philosophical framing, but at the same time, I hope you've picked up the fact that this is also something that you can do practical, useful things to fix. So do not be overwhelmed by the challenge, there are practical things that we've certainly learned in the UK, some of which may translate well to you here, some of which may not, but we'd be delighted to sort of have that conversation with you. Thank you.
So if Sweden decides to start a similar center like yours, would you come here and support them?
Of course. We would gift you everything we've learned because we're in this together, you know. So yes, but I think at the same time, you would gift us so much in terms of the intelligence with which you're making sense of this. So just coming over and spending time with you and colleagues over the last 2 days, I go back to England refreshed, stimulated, thinking differently. So it's an exchange.
So which questions do you have for Paul Manners? Yes, please wait for the microphone, please.
My name is Mattias Söberg. I come from Karolinska Institute, working as researcher. What I see is that you all give a picture of needs, talking about democracy, innovations, new methods. But what I see from my work is that all the system are pointing to one direction. It's like project management. You are in the university as long as you have the next funding for 3 years. Yeah. Then you're out. Yeah. And how can we make those two go together?
Yeah. I think there's many ways to answer that question. One answer is to say, look at how other large publicly funded or charitable institutions have managed to change over the last 15 years. I worked at the BBC for a long time. I've worked with one of our biggest charities, the National Trust, for a long time. Look at how they've learnt to adapt to becoming much more user-focused, publicly facing, and I think there are so many lessons that we can learn within higher education. Don't think that we need to work this out for ourselves because we're clever. Actually think about what is that challenge and who can help us think it through. So I'm sorry, that's not a particularly practical answer, but I think you're right. It's fundamentally the system is not working, and we need to do some creative things to fix that.
Yes, please.
My name is Jonas Stier, and I'm a researcher, a professor of sociology. I'd like to go back to the donkey. Yeah. You talked about the importance, the significant role of the top management. So how did you go about to actually, what kind of whips and carrots did you have for the top managers to actually accept the ref in itself and the entire scheme of impact-driven research? Can you just say a few things about sort of the frictions that actually gave rise to in the UK?
Yeah, and I think those frictions still exist. You know, they haven't gone away. I think one of the things that has helped is that this journey has been a collaboration between our funders and policymakers and our senior staff in universities. So a lot of this stuff has been designed in partnership. So it's been sensitive to what's possible. It's been challenging, but it's not been imposed onto the sector. So the REF was developed by the sector at the instruction of the government to come up with something that will work. So I think that's, frankly, the answer. And let's hope your policymakers are as open-minded as that.
But have you measured the effect of your work? Have you seen like an increased trust in science in the UK?
Yeah, we do monitor trust in science, and it hasn't gone down, which frankly is quite an achievement. And it continues, scientists continue to be one of the most trusted groups in society. So things have not got worse, which given the context of the last 10 years is a major achievement. In fact, they've got slightly better. And I think we've rerun the survey and things have got better in universities. So we're moving forward positively, but this is not a quick fix. This is a slow process of change. So I think you need to be realistic about that.
Any more questions? Yes, please.
Hi, my name's Rob Watt. I'm from SEI, Stockholm Environment Institute. Paul, you make it sound as though the REF is an extraordinary institute, an extraordinary tool for stimulating and incentivizing change. But how could, I mean, given that, what would you do to make it even better than it is? Where is it failing? Where are the things that you would change?
Yes. I think that, frankly, at the moment, it's good enough because the burden it puts on universities is not too heavy, and the sophistication of the measurement is not too burdensome. And so it's quite a gentle step in the right direction. So I think, frankly, it's good enough. I think we can agonize over trying to constantly tweak and perfect things. I think the issue isn't the ref, it's what's around the ref in terms of how I think sort of senior researchers are really embracing the kind of challenge around engagement and impact. So it's more about the people than the actual system of the ref. And I think, I think there's still a lot of skepticism and a lot of, rightful, I guess, critical challenge to what's happening. So, I think we just need to keep talking about it, frankly. We need to keep, and this for senior managers in universities is the point. You need to talk about it with staff. You need to allow them to express their frustrations, and you need to allow, you need to listen to them, because, without them actually feeling that they can make sense of the ref and actually understand the direction of travel, you will just get this constant resistance. So be more open and actually ask the kinds of questions I've been asking of you today. What is this university for? What is the value of the research that you do? You have to kind of open those conversations up.
I think be more open is a very good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Listen.
Listen,
I said change.
Open.
I'll leave you with one other word. And that is listen.
Listen. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences. Unfortunately, we have to go back to Swedish now. I'm sorry for that.
And just to say thank you for listening. Yeah.